Listen up, because Christmas 2025 was meant to be all soft lights, family snapshots, and that flawless holiday love everyone flaunts online. But for Claressa Shields, that day allegedly flipped entirely, turning into a silent, piercing humiliation. The kind of betrayal that doesn't explode, doesn't scream. It quietly sits heavy in your chest, eating away at you from the inside. Here's where it gets wild. Claressa goes live inside a Louis Vuitton store, luxury shelves, designer bags, glowing lights, and right there in real time, a duffel bag appears. Then comes the receipt. Her receipt. Her purchase. Her money. Crystal clear. No confusion. No maybe. It's black and white. But hours later, that exact same duffel bag resurfaces, only this time, framed as a gift from Papoose. A gift. So let me ask you, if it was truly a gift, why does the receipt show she paid for it? That's the first crack, and once it forms, the entire story starts falling apart from every angle. Then hits the second shockwave, a video from a completely different store. Same day energy, same camera angles. Papoose holding the camera exactly, like he's been seen doing in past videos with Remy Ma. And according to claims, the moment that footage started circulating in DMs, it vanished. Deleted. Like someone made a call to erase every trace before the public could connect the dots. But the internet never forgets. Tasha K says she already had the clip, what she calls proof. And that's when this story stops being just messy relationship drama and turns into something much darker, a financial triangle. Because the allegation isn't just cheating. It's manipulation. Leverage. A calculated strategy to keep her close while the marriage remained legally intact. And if you're wondering why money keeps popping up, tax liens, pawn shop records, debts, here's the truth. When people get desperate, love becomes a costume and loyalty becomes a transaction. The harshest part? If Claressa Shields truly believed she was the one while he was still legally tied to Remy Ma, then this wasn't romance. This was calculated positioning. Now listen closely, because this is where the tone shifts, where the hidden language and subtle signals allegedly reveal exactly how they viewed her.
I need a trick. I gotta put my glasses on, Jay. Hold on for a second. I need a trick. Yeah, I need a trick. I need a trick. Woo! Papoose is out here looking for a trick. And he got one. Yes, beautiful girl. Beautiful. Gorgeous girl. Y'all ain't gonna tell me Claressa ugly. I'm sorry, she's not. She don't care what 50 Cent got to say. At this point, the way 50 Cent running through women around here, I don't even think he really like women like that, in my opinion. Okay? Accused of doing some of the same things Diddy has been accused of, so I don't care. Everything but the baby oil. Everything's alleged, even my name's alleged. I'm just saying, that's what the baby mamas are saying. The gorgeous one. She cleans up well. Looking a little bit like Remy.
Christmas 2025 was supposed to be symbolic. Warm lights, chosen family, a moment where absence and gifts both carried meaning. But in this story, Christmas didn't bring joy or clarity. It exposed contradictions. Publicly, Claressa Shields said something simple, disarming, almost fragile. I was alone on Christmas. No theatrics. No anger. Just one sentence painting her as isolated, emotionally and physically. And for a moment, people accepted that as the full truth. But the internet doesn't stop at statements. It tracks timelines. And timelines don't lie, they collide. Because on that same day, while the narrative of loneliness was taking hold, Claressa went live on camera inside a Louis Vuitton store. Not days later. Not weeks before. That exact holiday window. Luxury lights. Designer shelves. Expensive designer bags everywhere. And right in the spotlight, a duffel bag sitting front and center. Then came the detail that flipped the story entirely. The receipt, not hidden, not leaked by someone else, but posted openly. Clear enough to read. Clear enough to timestamp. Clear enough to prove beyond doubt the duffel bag wasn't a gift. It was purchased by Claressa herself. And that's when the first fracture appeared. Because just hours later, not days, that same duffel bag resurfaced. This time, not on a store shelf, but in Papoose's hands, framed as if it were something he had gifted her. A gift? The implication was undeniable. The contradiction was louder than words. If it was a gift, then why does the receipt show it belonged to her? That question didn't explode. It didn't go viral instantly. It lingered, quietly planting doubt. And when questions linger, people start pulling threads. What came next wasn't just romance drama, it was pattern recognition. The story didn't just crack. It split wide open. Later that same day, a video surfaced from a different store. The setting had changed, but the energy felt eerily familiar. The energy matched. The camera angle. The grip. The positioning. Papoose was holding the phone exactly like he had in past videos with Remy Ma. This wasn't guesswork, it was visual consistency. And then, almost as quickly as the clip appeared, it vanished. Deleted. Not buried by time. Not lost in the algorithm. Removed entirely. According to the store owner, the deletion wasn't an accident. It wasn't delayed. It came after a call. A call that said, "Take it down." But by then, it was already too late. Because the clip had landed somewhere else first. In the hands of Tasha K. And in that moment, the story stopped being about whether the bag was a gift. It became about who was where and when. That's when the claim hardened. Papoose, Claressa Shields, and Remy Ma were allegedly all in the same city, on the same day, during the same holiday window. Then the explanation shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't that they weren't together, it became 2 different days. But timelines don't bend that easily. Same outfit, same camera handling, same store environment, different days, yet every detail identical. That explanation didn't hold. It hovered. And hovering explanations invite deeper scrutiny. This is where Tasha K delivers the statement that shifts the tone from investigative to truly unsettling. Not as fact, not as proof, but as instinct. Allegedly, her gut tells her something is still happening behind the scenes. That the marriage was never fully interrupted. That what the public saw wasn't separation, it was compartmentalization. And suddenly, the triangle redefines itself. This isn't a love triangle. It's a financial triangle. One person emotionally available. One marriage legally intact. And one flow of money keeping everything suspended. And this is where the story darkens further. Because alongside these timeline contradictions, another claim emerges, one that raises an even harder question. Claressa Shields was allegedly shown an $8 million Win Records deal, a number that can change lives and stabilize futures. But it also sparks a hard, unavoidable question. If Papoose was supposedly broke, where would that money even come from? This is where Tasha K drops what she calls receipts. Pawn shop records, jewelry, chains, bracelets, items that once signified wealth, now documented as collateral. And according to Remy Ma's own past statements, Papoose wasn't helping with bills. He wasn't contributing financially. He was kicked out, and shortly after, reportedly living in Claressa's apartment, driving her car, surrounded by her resources. Even the jewelry moment becomes tragic when you pause and examine it. A chain given as a birthday gift, Claressa calling it new, then quietly asking, "Where's yours?" Because the chain wasn't new. It was his. And that realization doesn't explode. It sinks. This is the moment where part 1 pivots from public spectacle into something more intimate and far more disturbing. Because when resources exchange hands without transparency and affection overlaps with dependency, intentions blur. And the final beat of this chapter lands not in emotion, but in documentation. In an old video, Remy Ma addresses Papoose directly. Not by nickname, by name, Willie. And that matters, because Willie leads to William, and William leads to Will Mackey. That name opens a completely different door. Public records. 13 years of unpaid taxes. Federal tax liens. 6-figure debts. Multiple filings. Encumbered property. This isn't gossip. This is paper. At this point, the story stops feeling like a celebrity scandal. It starts to feel like a structure under strain, one propped up by quietly moving money, while the public narrative stays loud and distracting. And just before this part closes, the footage that sparked all of this is addressed directly. The audience now sees the contradiction clearly. They've seen the receipt. They've noticed the framing. The illusion is no longer hidden. It's out in the open. But the final note of this part isn't about illusion. It's about erasure. Because that first store video didn't just vanish. It wasn't lost. It wasn't forgotten. It was removed under pressure. And that's the moment that locks this chapter into place. The point where coincidence ends and control begins.
I'm sad to report. Because here's the thing. The Christmas thing, we got to go back to 2025. I'm so sorry about this, y'all. We got to rewind it back. I got to do one spin for this. We got to rewind it back, okay? So the Christmas thing had me bothered. Had a lot of y'all bothered. Claressa spent Christmas alone. She was live in the Louis Vuitton store buying Louis Vuitton bags and a duffel bag. Posted the receipt of the duffel bag online, had Papoose give her a Louis Vuitton box with a duffel bag in it and forgot that she had posted the receipt stating that she bought the duffel bag that he gave her. Then she said, hey, can you get this online so people would think you bought me something? Okay, cool. I'm going to sit down right here like this. All right, right there. Put the camera up. Let's go. Same way he was holding the camera for Remy Ma that she claims that he was not with on Christmas Day.
Not with certainty. Not with closure, but with a realization. If videos are being deleted, if timelines refuse to align, if money moves quietly, and if marriages never officially end, then this story was never about what people said. It was about what they tried to erase. By the time the receipts, vanished footage, and Christmas contradictions settled, one question refused to fade. Why does money keep surfacing in a story that was supposed to be about love? At first, it seemed subtle. A bag here, a car there, an apartment swap no one ever explained. But then the narrative began to tilt, not toward romance, but toward survival. Because affection can be performed, debt cannot. This is the moment the story drops out of speculation and lands squarely into paperwork. Numbers, records, filings. The kind that don't care about celebrity status or public sympathy. According to public claims, the version of Papoose being presented, generous, stable, financially supportive, didn't match what the public records quietly revealed. And this is where the name starts to matter. Not the stage name, the legal one. Because once that legal name surfaced, the past stopped being blurry. Not months. Not a missed payment or two. But years. Over a decade of alleged unpaid tax obligations. Lien stacking. Notices compounding. Numbers that don't vanish just because the spotlight moves on. At this stage, the story becomes uncomfortable for a different reason, because it introduces motive. If someone is carrying unresolved financial pressure, the kind that follows you no matter where you live or who you're seen with, then every relationship becomes strategic by default. Support stops being emotional. It becomes logistical. This reframes everything that came before. The luxury purchases no longer look celebratory. The living arrangements no longer feel temporary. And the gift framing no longer sounds romantic, it feels necessary. Then the spotlight shifts. Because while one side of this triangle was allegedly struggling under years of unpaid obligations, another side was quietly facing their own financial gravity. Remy Ma. According to publicly discussed records, she wasn't standing on solid ground either, allegedly carrying a tax burden so heavy it reshaped the entire narrative, over $600,000. That number changes behavior. That number turns silence into strategy. And when two people are bound by history, reputation, and shared exposure, money becomes the glue that keeps them aligned even when emotions fracture. This is where the story sharpens. Because if both sides of a marriage are under financial strain, then separation isn't just emotional, it's dangerous. Divorce stops being about freedom. It becomes about collapse. And that's when the third point of the triangle begins to look less like a partner and more like a solution. Claressa Shields, publicly strong, financially active, earning in real time. This is where the allegation cuts the deepest. Not that she was involved, but that she was positioned. Positioned as emotional cover. Positioned as financial relief. Positioned as someone close enough to absorb pressure without ever knowing the full weight of it. And the language used to describe her role is harsh, deliberately so. A buffer. A lick. A cash machine. Not words of love. Words of function. Words of function. And when you replay the earlier moments through that lens, the behavior changes shape. The duffel bag stops looking like a gift. It becomes optics. The apartment stops feeling like comfort. It becomes shelter. The jewelry stops reading as romance. It turns into rotation. And suddenly, the Christmas silence doesn't feel accidental. It feels managed. Because while Claressa Shields says she was alone, the claim is that Papoose was elsewhere, with family, with his wife, with a stability that never officially ended. That isn't a loud betrayal. It's the quietest kind. The kind that lets someone believe in a future while the present is already decided. And then comes the moment that hardens speculation into something closer to documentation. Not a rumor, not a feeling, but a statement tied directly to records.
And when this video came out and they put it in my DM and I posted it, the owner of this fur coat store deleted the videos. He got a call mysteriously to delete immediately, but too late. Tasha K already had it, boo. Proof that they was together on Christmas. He was with his kids, his wives, Remy. He held the camera when Remy did her little video.
Once that clip lands, the air changes. Because now the audience isn't reacting to gossip. They're reacting to scale. 13 years. That's not oversight. That's avoidance. And when avoidance is paired with luxury imagery and emotional storytelling, it creates a split reality. One for the public and one for survival. This is the point where the theory of a fake deal begins to circulate, not as accusation, but as logic. If money is promised but never transferred, if a deal exists on paper but not in cash, if reassurance alone keeps someone invested, then the benefit isn't the payout. It's patience. And patience buys time. Time to avoid consequences. Time to delay exposure. Time to keep everything unresolved. Which brings us back to the divorce that never happened. The withdrawal that raised eyebrows. Because if separation would trigger financial reckoning, shared assets examined, obligations exposed, debt surfaced, then staying together quietly becomes the safest move. And in that silence, Claressa Shields' role becomes tragically clear. Not as a villain, but as collateral. Someone whose earnings could float debts without questions. Someone whose public presence could distract from records. Someone close enough to absorb pressure without ever being told the full cost. Whose belief could be leveraged without paperwork. This isn't a love triangle. It's a pressure triangle. And pressure doesn't need affection to operate. It only needs access. By the end of this part, the story stops asking whether Claressa Shields was misled. It asks something colder. Was she ever meant to know? Because when relationships are built around avoidance, honesty becomes a liability. And the silence around the marriage, the silence around the finances, the silence around the deleted footage, they all start to sound the same. Controlled. The heart of this story doesn't end with outrage. It ends with realization. The greatest danger here wasn't betrayal. It was invisibility. By the time the money trail finally surfaced, the story had already crossed a point of no return. This was no longer about receipts, missing videos, or timelines that didn't align. It was about what silence can do when it stretches long enough to feel intentional. Because in this case, silence wasn't just absence. It was structure. Up until now, every contradiction could be dismissed as coincidence. Every overlap waved away as misunderstanding. Every financial question reframed as business. But there comes a moment in stories like this where the silence itself becomes louder than any allegation. And that moment arrives when the roles are finally named, not publicly, not officially, but privately, in the language people use when they believe no one is listening. This is where the narrative turns cold. Because the claim isn't just that Claressa Shields was misled. It's that she was positioned to believe she was chosen, while the marriage she thought had ended was never actually dismantled. Positioned to feel emotionally special while legally, everything stayed exactly where it was. Positioned to keep investing time, loyalty, and money into something that was never meant to become real. That's the difference between heartbreak and design. Heartbreak happens when plans fall apart. Design happens when the plans were never meant to include you. And this is where the language used behind closed doors matters more than any public post. According to allegations, Claressa wasn't treated like a partner. She was treated like a function, a buffer when pressure rose, a shield when finances tightened, a distraction when attention needed redirecting. That's why the phrase that surfaces later hits so hard. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's revealing. You are the lick. Words like that don't come from love. They come from calculation. They reveal a mindset where someone isn't seen as a person, but as a resource. And when you revisit everything through that lens, the emotional pieces rearrange themselves. The Christmas claim of being alone stops sounding like self-pity. It starts sounding like realization. Because while Claressa says she spent that day alone, the claim remains that Papoose was with his wife and child, exactly where the law still recognized him to be. That isn't chaos. That's order. An order Claressa was never part of. This is the emotional core of the story. Not the scandal. Not the gossip. But the quiet moment when someone realizes that what they were experiencing wasn't a relationship. It was proximity. And proximity can be withdrawn at any time. This is where the allegation about the divorce becomes critical. Because divorces don't just end marriages, they expose finances. They trigger audits. They force transparency. They drag private arrangements into public light, arrangements into legal daylight. And according to what's been claimed, that daylight never came. The divorce didn't move forward. It was withdrawn. And that decision reframes everything. Because if separation would collapse the financial structure holding two people together, then staying married becomes strategic, even if emotionally distant. And inside that strategy, Claressa Shields' role becomes tragic. Not because she was foolish, but because she was excluded from the truth. This is where the story steps away from celebrity culture and into something far more uncomfortable. Because it asks a question people don't like to confront. How many relationships exist only to protect something else? Reputation, debt, stability, control. And how often is love used as the language that hides those motives? As the pressure builds, the claims grow sharper. That the so-called $8 million deal wasn't meant to be cashed. That it was reassurance, not revenue. That its purpose was to keep Claressa emotionally and financially invested long enough for other problems to be managed quietly. And if that's true, then the final reveal isn't about money. It's about intention. Because once someone realizes they were never meant to cross from access into commitment, the illusion collapses. This is where the interview lands, not as entertainment, but as exposure. There's no money. After that clip, there's no return to ambiguity. Because this isn't framed as jealousy. It isn't framed as bitterness. It's framed as a warning. A warning that Claressa Shields may be funding a structure designed to exclude her. A warning that the marriage she believed was over never actually ended. A warning that her silence has been convenient for the people who benefit from it. And this is where the ending becomes unavoidable. Tasha K's conclusion isn't loud. It's final. She doesn't say the relationship ended. She says it never started, because starting requires honesty. Starting requires freedom. Starting requires the absence of another legal commitment. And according to what's been alleged, none of those conditions were present. So what remains isn't a choice for the audience. It's a choice for Claressa. Does she walk away and force the structure into daylight? Or does she stay quiet and continue absorbing the cost of a system that was never built for her benefit? That's why this story no longer feels like gossip. It feels like a pattern. Powerful men Ambiguous relationships. Women kept close but never included. Money used to stabilize silence. And patterns don't disappear when you ignore them. They repeat. This part doesn't end with outrage. It ends with clarity. Because once someone realizes they were never part of the plan, the only real question left is how long they're willing to keep paying for believing otherwise. And this is where the story stops being entertainment and starts feeling personal. Because if even half of what's been alleged is true, then this wasn't confusion. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't bad timing. It was design. Carefully paced. Quietly managed. Emotionally expensive. Claressa Shields didn't lose a relationship. She lost clarity. She was allowed to believe in proximity while commitment lived somewhere else. Allowed to invest while the structure around her stayed untouched. Allowed to stand in the spotlight while decisions were being made in rooms she was never invited into. That isn't heartbreak. That's positioning. And the most dangerous part isn't the money. It's the silence. Because silence protects systems. Silence hides debt. Silence allows marriages to remain legally intact while emotions are outsourced somewhere else. This is how people get used without ever being openly rejected. No breakup. No honesty. No clean ending. Just distance disguised as affection. And if you're watching this thinking, this could never happen to me, that's exactly why stories like this keep repeating. Because they don't start with lies. They start with access. They start with reassurance. They start with promises that sound real enough to delay questions. Until one day the receipts surface. The videos disappear. The timelines collide. And the truth feels heavier than the lie ever did. So ask yourself this. If the relationship was real, why did it need so much silence to survive? If the intentions were pure, why does everything only make sense when you follow the money? This isn't about picking sides. It's about recognizing patterns. Because patterns don't care who you are. They only care that you stay quiet long enough to benefit someone else. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So the real question isn't what happens next in the story,